Hello, this is Sophia Nakandi. I'm going to discuss causation and remoteness under the law of torts. Remoteness is a set of rules in both tort and contract which limits the amount of compensatory damages. In day-to-day life, we normally use the word remote to mean places which are far away. And in the context, it means far from the contemplation of the parties. So, under the law of torts, and when we are looking at damages under contract, when they use the word remoteness of damage, it means that the damage that has occurred, the damage or the loss that has occurred was far from the contemplation of the parties, that it is something which occurred which was not expected. In negligence, the test of causation not only requires that the defendant was the cause, but it also requires that the loss of damage sustained was not too remote. Remoteness is a further limit to a cause of action to ensure that the liability to pay damages is fairly placed on the defendant. Okay, so when we add these two words together, causation, for causation you must show that the defendant was the cause. And remoteness, we have explained remoteness to mean that the damage that has occurred was, if they say the damage was too remote, it means it was too far away from the contemplation of the parties. But the traditional approach was that once a breach of duty had been established, the defendant was liable for the consequent damage, no matter how unusual or unpredictable the damage might be. I'll give an example for a case that was decided a long time ago. This is the case of remoteness. The case of remoteness and Furnace, Withy and Company Limited, 1921, Volume 3, KB, page 560. In this case, while a ship was docked, the workers employed to unload this ship negligently dropped a plank into the hold, which struck something, causing a spark which ignited petrol vapor lying in the hold. A fire occurred, and this fire destroyed the whole ship. It was held that once some harm was foreseeable, the defendant would be liable for the full extent of the harm. Okay, so as long as there was as long as there was some harm that was foreseeable, the defendant would be liable for the full extent of the harm. That was the traditional approach. However, in later cases, there was a change of view. In the case of the wagon mound, a large quantity of oil was spilled into Sydney Harbour from the wagon mound, and it drifted under the wharf where the claimants were welding. A fire occurred, and the resulting fire caused extensive damage to the wharf and to the vessels moored nearby. The Privy Council placed the direct consequence test with the requirement that in order to be recoverable, the damage must be foreseeable in all the circumstances, and that although pollution was foreseeable, as a consequence of the spillage, an outbreak of fire was not foreseeable. Okay, maybe to add on to the definition I gave on remoteness of damage, that the claimant must show, first of all, that the damage that occurred was foreseeable and that it was not too far from the contemplation of the parties. Okay, in this case of the wagon mound, court went on to state that a man must be considered to be responsible for the probable consequences of his act. Okay, but to demand more is too harsh a rule, and to demand less is to ignore that civilized order requires observance of a minimum standard of behavior. I hope you get it. Okay, a man must be considered to be responsible for the probable consequences of his act. That's all. All those other consequences which are not probable these would fall under the kind of damage which is too remote, unforeseeable, far away from the contemplation of the parties. And therefore, in the case of the wagon mound, court did not follow the traditional approach. In another case, that is Lamp versus London Borough of Camden. I'm looking for the citation here. Okay, in this case, a water main maintained by council broke and caused extensive damage to the claimant's house. As a result of that, the claimant moved out and squatters moved in, causing further damage to the house. When he sued, court held that the secondary damage caused by squatters was too remote. And that the defendants were only liable for the damage caused by the broken water main. Let's look at another example. Another example is the case of Jolly versus Sutton London Borough. Please refer to the articles I sent out for the citation. In this case, I'll give you the full details of the case. The council allowed an abandoned boat to remain on its land, and over a period of time, 2 boys began to paint and repair it. Unfortunately, the boat fell on one of the boys and seriously injured him. The claimant's case was that the boat represented a trap or an allurement. The council accepted that it had been negligent in not removing the boat, but that it had not been foreseeable that the 2 boys would try to jack up the boat and so move it from the cradle upon which it laid. Lord Stein and Hoffman stated that it is not necessary to foresee the precise injury that occurred, but injury of a given description. The foreseeability is not as to that, is not as to the particulars, but the genus, and the description formulated by reference to the nature of the risk that ought to have been foreseen. Okay, I'll just let's just summarize it. Okay, let's just summarize this holding. The whereas the council had accepted that it had been negligent in not removing the board, it argued that it was not foreseeable that two boys would try to jack up the board and so move the cradle on which it laid, and resulting into injury. And the court was of the view that it is not necessary to foresee every precise injury that occurred, but injury of a given description. It is not necessary for a person to foresee each and every. Now, what the court is saying is that there was a probability or possibility that injury would result as a result of leaving the board